Hello. Today's notes, I just have three examples that I want to go through, and we're going to talk about factoring by grouping today. So last class, we talked about factoring by GCF, and today, like I said, grouping. And again, what type of factoring you do will depend entirely on the expression that you are trying to factor. Okay, so they're going to look different, and that's why we have different factoring methods. All right. So for a factor by grouping, you can see it's kind of always going to look the same when you take a look at it. In that, if you want to do factor by grouping, you're going to have four terms when you start. Okay. It's called grouping because what you're going to do is you're going to take those four terms and you're going to divide it into groups of two. Okay. And then once you do that, you're going to do the same thing that you practiced the other day, and that is you're going to go ahead and factor each one of those little groups by trying to find a GCF. All right. So again, grouping has to have four terms to start. You make two groups of two, and then you factor each little group using your GCF. All right. So that's the process. So let's take a look at what I have here for example number one. All right, so again, you can see I have four terms. We have 3x squared plus 15x plus 4x plus 20. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take your four terms and you're going to make two groups. So sometimes you can draw like big brackets or parentheses around them so that you can see where your groups are. In your second group, again, make sure you keep that little sign there because that's going to be important when you start factoring using your GCF. All right. So once you do that, again, we're back to taking a look at each little group and finding a GCF. The GCF, again, could be a number, it could be a variable, or it could be a combination of those two. So again, you just have to kind of look and see what's going on and what they have in common. So in my first group, as far as my numbers, I have a 3 and a 15. Both of those have a common factor of 3. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write down a 3. As far as the variables, this one has a x squared and this one also has a x. So I know they have at least one x in common. So my GCF is going to be 3x. I'm going to go ahead and write that down in front. All right. So again, when we did our GCF practice the other day, like I said, you find your GCF, and then what you're going to do is you're going to divide each one of these by the GCF. Okay. So if you need to write the little divided by 3x, you can squeeze that in there. I'm just going to kind of do that process in my head as we work through our problem. So if I have a 3 divided by a 3, that will give me a 1. You could put the 1 there if you'd like. If you have an x squared divided by an x, that would leave you with x. So you can either write x or 1x. And I would go ahead and put my plus sign and I divide again. 15 divided by a 3 would be a 5. And then the x divided by x would cancel or just become 1. All right, so I just did my GCF on the first part. I'm all done with that. And then I just go ahead and I repeat the same process with the second part. So in my second part here, we have a 4x, that's a positive, plus a 20. This time we just have a number in common. There's no variables in common because this one doesn't have an x. So the only thing they have in common is a 4. And since it's a positive, I'm going to put a plus there. So I'm going to put plus 4. And that is going to be my GCF for my second part. And again, just like before, we go ahead and divide those two pieces by the 4. So 4x divided by a 4 would just leave me with x. And this is a positive 20 divided by a positive 4, and that will leave me with a 5. All right. Now, when you do your grouping, one thing that hopefully maybe you noticed when you looked at what I have now inside my parentheses here, you'll notice that inside this group, we have the x plus 5, and inside this group, we also have an x plus 5. So when you're doing factoring by grouping, that should happen. If that doesn't happen, then maybe you can't use this method, or maybe you made a mistake, but you do want these two to match and look the same. All right, so as far as my final answer, we're going to go ahead and we're going to write that x plus 5, okay? And I just need to write it once, because basically what we're doing is we're factoring again. This one was in common. And then inside my other set of parentheses, I'm going to put, I call them the leftovers, I'm going to put those GCFs. So we had a 3x for our GCF in our first group, And my second group, we had a +4. So we go ahead and fill that in. So these would be my two factors. Okay, so my x plus 5 times my 3x plus 4. And again, if you wanted to check your answer, you could do a little bit of quick foiling. Okay, if I foiled these together, doing my first outside, inside, last, we would get back to the beginning with what we started with here in these 4 terms. All right. Okay. Example number 2. Set this up here. All right. So again, first thing you'll notice is we do have our 4 terms. Okay, so we have 12n to the 3rd minus 15n squared minus 8n plus a 10. All right, so again, my first step is I'm going to just go ahead and we're going to divide this up into our 2 parts, our 2 little groups. And then again, for each group, we just go ahead and we do our GCF. Again, looking for what they have in common, numbers, variables, or both. So in the first group here, as far as my numbers, I do see a 12 and a 15. So I do believe number-wise, we have a 3 in common for both of those. And as far as my variables, here I have an n to the 3rd, here I have an n squared. So again, as far as my variables, we have n squared in common. All right, so again, I'm going to write that out in front, and I'm going to go ahead and again, one piece at a time, we go ahead and divide. So 12 divided by 3 is 4. If we have n to the 3rd divided by n squared, that would just leave me with just n. And we have a minus sign there. 15 divided by 3 would be 5. N squared divided by n squared, and that would cancel and just become 1. All right, so there's my first GCF part. And we go ahead and we do the same thing with the second part. So on the second part here, again, the first thing I notice is that there's not an n here. So we have no variables in common, so we're just looking for a number they have in common. We have a 8, and again, that's a negative, and we have a 10. All right, so since this is a negative, I'm going to go ahead and use a common factor of a negative 2. So 8 can be divided by 2, and 10 can be divided by 2. All right, so we're going to divide both of those by a negative 2. Here we have a negative divided by negative. So a negative 8 divided by a negative 2 would be a positive 4. And again, we still have n. We have a positive 10 divided by a negative 2. That would give me a negative 5. All right. And again, you'll notice, just like in the first one, like I said, what you end up with inside those parentheses there needs to be the same. And again, if it doesn't match, sometimes you might just have a sign mistake. So again, this is where you have to be careful with your signs here. And that's why I use that negative 2 rather than just a positive 2. All right. So my final factors, we're going to take the factor that we had, that 4n minus 5. So again, I always check to make sure it's the same. I'll go ahead and write that one in the front. Okay, and then in my other set, I'm going to take, again, what were those little GCFs? So my GCF here was that 3n squared, and my GCF there was the minus 2. Okay, so we have now factored that using our grouping. All right. Okay, we've got one more here. So let's take a look at number 3. So again, just like the others, you can see we have 4 terms to start. We have 5x to the 4 plus 15x to the 3 plus x plus 3. All right, so here's group 1, and this one is group 2. All right, again, looking for a GCF in our first group here. I see 5 and 15, so I'm thinking they have a 5 for a number in common. And as far as my x's, we do have some x's here and here. And again, x to the 3, so they have at least x to the 3 in common. All right, so we have a 5 in common and the x to the 3rd. All right, then we go ahead and we do our dividing. So 5 divided by 5, that will become 1. And again, you could write the 1 if you'd like. X to the 4 divided by x to the 3, that would leave me just with x. All right, we have plus 15 divided by 5 would leave me with 3. And then x to the third divided by x to the third, again, that would cancel and leave me with just 1. So we just have x plus 3 left inside. All right. Now in our second group, we have, again, there's a positive x plus 3. And when you're looking at this, variable-wise, again, this one does not have an x. So again, I know they have no variables in common. And as far as the numbers in common, really, they don't have any numbers in common either. Again, I could always pencil a little 1 here if I wanted. So really, if there's no numbers in common, the only thing that you can use is 1, because everything has 1 in common. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a 1 here, a little plus 1. And basically, if I divide by 1, I just get what I started with. So if I take my 1x and divide by 1, I still have x. And if I take my 3 and divide by 1, I still have 3. Okay, so if you ever notice that you're like, well, I can't find anything in common, then again, the only thing they might have in common is that 1. Okay, and again, just like my other examples, like I said, here's that x plus 3, and it matches with this x plus 3 here. So again, that should happen if we're doing this right. So x plus 3 is going to be one of my factors. And then inside my other set of parentheses here, we're going to go ahead and copy down those little GCFs that we have kind of hanging out in front. So we have a 5x to the third plus 1. Okay. And again, whenever you're doing your grouping, like I said, you could check your answer by doing a quick little FOIL, first outside, inside, last. Just like you can check doing your GCF by doing a little distributive property, just to kind of make sure you didn't make any mistakes in your dividing or your signs or your GCFs. All right. So that is it for grouping. Your homework tonight, you will be practicing that. So good luck.